Our next guest actually knows Governor Butch Otter quite well and works quite closely with him and has for a very long time. In fact, I've had the pleasure of hearing Lieutenant Governor Brad Little speak on a number of occasions, and I will share that he is very detail oriented. That is, he does his homework when it comes to everything from Idaho National Laboratory to economy to internet access. And he has just returned from a few days in Washington where he was taking part in an exposition which could result in a lot of businesses, perhaps from around the country as well as around the world, coming to Idaho to set up shop. And he was doing his diligent work trying to promote the economy here in this state. And first of all, sir, welcome to our program today. Good to have you here.
Nice to be on.
I saw a quick story about this. Betsy Russell wrote about some of the confusion while both the governor was out of state and you were out of state the last few days. But what more intrigued me in her piece in the Spokesman Review the other day, there was a photograph of you and Jim Risch standing at the exposition in front of a display and really doing, I guess, what you'd call a salesmanship job when it comes to Idaho. I suspect you met a few people who had more than a little curiosity about what the place is like.
Actually, we had a lot of interest. There were 27 what we call Team Idaho members that attended Select USA. Mayor of Twin Falls, Mayor of Burley, Mayor of Ammon, and a lot of people from Commerce, our Department of Commerce, City Council people, just a variety of people from all around the state promoting, their local communities in the state of Idaho.
I was going to say a lot of people that are looking at Idaho obviously are attracted. Number one, even though we're in the northwest corner of the country, the climate is still relatively, I guess, compared to some other places, mild. Number two, though, our tax structure, word about our business friendliness, I assume, is getting around.
It is, and I actually was on a panel with a person from the Appalachia area and a person from the South talking about opportunities in rural America. I was obviously talking about Idaho, and I said, one of the issues is we're a little further from the market in Idaho, but the fact that a lot of the workforce can get to work in 5 minutes, you save enough money there to add to the freight. And of course, our new freight facility in Burley, where we're going to be able to get, cut the freight time from the Magic Valley to the Middle America and Eastern America market by half is going to be a big help to people that want to, set up shop and add value to our commodities here in Idaho.
About a year and a half ago, I was talking with State Representative Maxine Bell, who you served alongside of course, for quite some time. And she had referenced that the first part of this has been done. We've attracted a lot of companies and jobs to Idaho. She said the next step is, though, we need to start bringing in the more high tech industries that will pay a little bit better than a lot of the base that we've already built. Is that a pretty spot on assessment?
Well, absolutely. Of course, I really, and I talked about the three legs. One, we want our existing companies to be successful and grow from the smallest to the largest. Second, we want companies that are additive. Fabrical and Burley that makes the cups for Chobani would be because if Chobani has lower costs, then they can pay more for the milk. But third, we want to diversify our economy so that we. I'm being an ag guy, understands fully that commodity prices go up and down, and if we're going to keep Idaho thriving and rural Idaho thriving, if you have them dependent upon one commodity and that commodity goes down, then it's hard to sustain the community. But if you add resilience to those communities by diversifying, and a lot of that's in the technology field or advanced manufacturing, and those were some of the companies we were talking to, then it adds resilience and is supportive of the existing jobs and careers that we have here.
I know that water, of course, is also something people ask a lot about. And at least here in the River Valley, we can point to it and say there's a ready supply that's always ready coming in the runoff and down the Snake River. But that obviously the resources you mentioned were not necessarily close to a lot of markets, but people ask a lot about those natural resources that are available.
They were. I had a pretty interesting response from a couple of the companies when I say we consume more water per capita in Idaho than all but one state. They didn't understand what percent of our agriculture is dependent upon irrigation. But we had a really good year. The state collectively, and that's the water users, the Department of Water Resources, the Water Board. Our efforts this year to do recharge have been beyond. Of course, we had a very wet year. That was helpful also. But we've been talking about recharge for years and doing some of it. But we are now getting to the point to where we're really creating the kind of recharge we need so that agriculture and the state is sustainable into the future.
Governor, can you hold on? We've got a short break, and then I believe we're going to have pretty close to 10 o'clock that you'll be with us. Can you hold on for a couple of minutes?
No problem.
Lieutenant Governor Brad Little joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and we're talking about some economic development issues and what to expect in the future. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. We've got 71 at 9:40. Our guest until 10 o'clock this morning, I'm going to say he's a policy guy. Some people in politics, they can work a crowd up into a frenzy and do those types of things. We sometimes overlook those people who are deeply involved with various public policy, whether it be economic policy, energy policy, and the like. Lieutenant Governor Brad Little from here in Idaho is joining us this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 9:43 and it's 72. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We should point out, Governor, too, for people who don't know, I don't know how they wouldn't know this, but you are looking for a new job. Can I mention that?
Sure.
You are among the first to throw your hat into the ring in the race for governor next year. And I referenced that you may not be, I think, sometimes as flashy in working up a crowd, perhaps, as some other people there. But I mentioned the policy involvement because sometimes that does get overlooked when people are campaigning. And if you were to address someone and explain that, sometimes maybe the fellow who's calmest at the rudder can get more done. Is that a good description?
Well, I would hope so. Idaho is a very diverse state. The diversity from Sandpoint to Montpelier is incredible, and I know lieutenant governors and governors from other states where but a lot of states have that kind of diversity. But it's important to understand when an issue comes up, because the governor's required to make anywhere from 10 to 20 decisions a day, that you instinctively know what's important to those communities and to the families and to the people out there. And so I've been very lucky that when I got this job, even though it's a part-time job, I spent a lot of time traveling and listening. And so and I often get accused of being in the weeds, but you need to be in the weeds if you want to understand what's important to the diverse population in Idaho.
And we were talking off air about an issue that you heard about at the Capital for a Day event at Hanson a few months ago, and I've heard about it too as well from State Representative Megan Blanksma, that Idaho lags when it comes to internet service. We may have it. I mean, it may be wired in, but in some places it's not quite as reliable, I suppose, as people would like it to be. And I know in my conversation with her about this issue, she said we need to start looking at it as if it's a public utility. We look at that with sewer and with water and with highways and all of these things, and that maybe we've reached the point where if we want to enhance business growth, we really have to have the government perhaps ride herd a bit more on all of this. What's your take on that?
Well, I have done quite a bit of research on it, and I prefer a hybrid model, because we have rural areas in rural Idaho. You go to Rockland and go out there, and those farms and ranches out there have, you got to pay for it. But matter of fact, there is agricultural ground in that part of the state that has a better connection than I do in my apartment 2 blocks from the Capitol building. and so it's a hit and miss, and that's why I say it should be a hybrid. Is we should have incentives to be sure we reach out to those areas that are critical. I will tell you that some of the rankings about where Idaho ranks are not accurate. A lot of that capacity is proprietary amongst the different utilities, be they big or small, that provide that. And so they'll say, well, we don't, you go to the last map that the state did and say, well, the coverage isn't very good. And then you get the local economic development person and they call their utility, and all of a sudden that speed snaps way up as a result of what's available. We're trying to get our arms around that. The last time we did an assessment, they're plowing fiber into the ground every day and putting in wireless capacity every day, and so that's improving. But I think a hybrid model would allow us to reach out and create incentives to get it into some of these rural areas while allowing competition to drive down the cost and the capacity in the areas that already have it.
I think a little bit about the history, not too far away from here in Promontory Point. Obviously, two railroads met. The government allowed private development to come in, by allowing them to compete and saying, all right, who's going to give us the best price along this right of way? Is it a model similar to that?
Well, and of course that is part of the issue is where do you if you got to plow in, and that's one of the advantages really rural Idaho does is the counties say you put fiber out into our rural areas, we'll let you plow the fiber right in our right of way, and so all they have to do is they don't have the procurement costs that they have in an urban area. But we want to incentivize, and we first did that by putting it to all the high schools. The next step is to get it to all the schools, and by getting it there, we've got the big pipes into the communities. Now we just have to do what they call the last mile hookup to the business areas. The city of Ammon they're providing internet access in the city of Ammon. The mayor of Ammon was with us on the Select USA trip, and actually my hometown of Emmett, they got a grant, and they're putting in the conduit so that the utilities can compete there. I don't think we should put in a road. The state should help put in a road or a sidewalk or any kind of an improvement without making sure that there's either the conduit or the fiber there so that it can be built out, so we don't have to tear up roads that are already built to put in new fiber.
Our guest is Lieutenant Governor Brad Little from here in the state of Idaho, and you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley. We're at 9:49. We've got 71. And Governor, I believe we have a caller with us. Let's see if we can get the caller on the air. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air with Lieutenant Governor Brad Little. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello, gentlemen. Thank you for taking my call. I'm actually calling you from Silicon Valley in California.
Ooh.
And my family is planning to move to Idaho the first quarter of next year. And the reason why is because living here my whole life, the IT companies have destroyed the state. The politicians have destroyed the state. And I've lived here, like I said, my whole life, and I was here before Silicon Valley, and they promised the jobs for Californians. Well, now what we have is people from other states moving here and other countries. The Californians aren't getting the jobs in the IT industry or the newer businesses. The people from other states or other countries are. So when you guys are talking about this, I'm like, Idaho's about to destroy itself in some sense.
Huh.
It's really sad here. That's why you have a lot of Californians moving out, like to Austin, Texas, and other states, and Idaho. And I don't know any Californians naturally born here, from my generation, because they moved to other states because the politicians, through their taxes, have destroyed the state. I'm sure Lieutenant Governor knows everything in regards to the political side of California with Jerry Brown and so forth. But the IT companies, to make it in Silicon Valley, you have to make over $100,000 a year just to buy a cup of coffee here. If you're making under $100,000, it's very difficult to survive here.
Well,
and the people getting the jobs are, like I said, people from other states like East Coast or people from other countries. There's no Californians getting jobs. My fear is when I move to Idaho, the same thing that's happened to California will happen to Idaho. So what I'm escaping will come to Idaho, and then I'll have to move maybe Wyoming. I don't know.
Well, well,
So
uh,
I just
let's let the lieutenant governor jump in on that one. I guess we'll take high-paying jobs because even newcomers pay taxes, right?
Well, we do have a lot of we we do have a lot of California folks, particularly in the technology company. Because you take a young student from wherever they are, and they get stars in their eyes, and they go to Silicon Valley, and one of the things they learn there is a skill, and because the technology is evolving so fast, but then when they get to be 25, 30, you want to start a family, own a home, that's when we wave our arm profusely and say, look at us. If you understand the value, particularly if they started in Idaho and went down to California, they can come back, afford a home, have a lifestyle, enjoy the family values that we have here in Idaho, and be a big participant in the myriad of technology companies. And some of these technology companies are the technology aspect of agriculture, of timber, of food processing. They're not all either building a piece of hardware or writing software code. And we have been very successful. Joel Calkin, who's a demographer for Forbes, talks about that the Intermountain West, because of the cost of living in the Seattle area and the Silicon Valley area, is their workforce is going to be those 25 to 35-year-olds that want to buy a home and raise a family and have those values. And I can tell you, I represented a district that had a lot of new Californians. They were as conservative or more conservative than my indigenous Idaho neighbors.
I'm not surprised because I have a friend who moved here from California, and she founded a right-wing website. She moved here to get away from it, and then another friend in Georgia last week was asking me about life here because he has an internet business he runs from home, and he feels that he doesn't have enough liberty. And I said, well, if you're looking for liberty, this is probably the one of the last bastions of it in your economic sense. So these people coming here will not be bringing what you might call um, left coast values.
No, it's I get it occasionally, but I mean, just look at the politics in Idaho. Just look at look at what takes place in Idaho. We are very inclined to take a good thing and make it better by maintaining those values. We do have to invest in infrastructure. We have to have communications infrastructure, road infrastructure, and we've got to have an education system. I would prefer that those kids not leave, and in fact, the ones that had to leave, particularly during the slowdown, now we've got the base, whether it be in technology, industrial, or agriculture, to where now our kids can stay. And that's, to me, that's the overarching goal of everything, is to have an Idaho to where our kids can stay and thrive here instead of having to go elsewhere.
Got about 2 minutes to go. I have a question. I was telling you about this earlier that was emailed me by one of our listeners, and it's a very open-ended question, but she said, what is his plan for more funding for road repair?
Well, the legislature put some money in this year. Basically, in Twin Falls County, you'll get part of it because of the disasters.
Right.
But I chaired the governor's transportation task force, and we are going to have to continue to invest in our roads because most commodities we make here have to leave the state. And because of Idaho's shape and size, we have twice as many miles of road per person in Idaho than they do in Oregon, Washington, or Utah. And so that simple mathematical calculation means you've got a higher burden to keep those roads maintained and in good shape and to facilitate commerce.
Well, Lieutenant Governor Brad Little, we'd like to thank you for taking some time with us this morning. We did talk about the fact that you are looking for a new job. For people who'd like to know a little bit more about that, I'm sure you could send them to a website. What's the address?
Brad Little for Idaho.
That's pretty simple. Is that four FOR or just the number four?
No, FOR.
All right, super. We look forward to chatting with you again sometime soon.
Thank you very much. Good to visit with you.
Take care, sir. Lieutenant Governor Brad Little joining us this morning, taking a few minutes with us. He has just returned from an event in Washington, which was an exposition, a high-tech exposition, where the whole goal was, as he pointed out, they took a number of different people, business people, as well as mayors from some of our various communities, including Sean Berriger here from it in Twin Falls, to try and turn people on from the corporate world around the country and around the world to doing business in Idaho. And there may be some results from that we'll be hearing about in the coming weeks and months. We've got to take a break, of course, for the next 22 hours. This show is not long enough. I keep lobbying. Maybe somebody could help me do that a little bit more on the outside. 9:58. We've got news coming up from Fox Radio in just a moment. Rush Limbaugh will follow the news at 10 o'clock this morning. Glenn Beck at 4 o'clock, and sandwiched in between today from 1 until 4 o'clock, you'll be able to tune into Sean Hannity. All of that ahead on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 73. God willing, and the creek don't rise, they'll allow me to come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock.